Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay. Thanks. I just wanted to make sure. Welcome, everybody. Today's presentation is one of a series our club is presenting about economic and workforce development issues in Mid-Coast Maine. It is the 6th talk we have hosted about the shortage of workforce housing and how to improve opportunities for local workers to live within a reasonable distance of their jobs. Brenda Torpy is with us today to explain one solution that has worked in other regions. Brenda is a nationally recognized authority on how community land trusts, called CLTs, help provide permanently affordable workforce housing. For nearly 30 years, she led the Champlain Housing Trust in Vermont, the largest CLT in the US. She has helped many other communities successfully address the need for affordable housing, and we are honored to welcome her to our meeting. If you have questions for Brenda, please note them in the chat window and we will moderate those later. So welcome, Brenda. I'm going to turn this over to you now.
Thank you very much, Joan. And thank you, everybody, both for inviting me to do this, but especially for your good work on affordable housing for your region. What we're going to do together today is look at what is a CLT, the simple, and what its unique characteristics are that can address your issues. And then a very brief sort of history of the model, just to see how it's evolved and what's the context today. And then we'll look at how does the model work on the ground by looking at an example, and especially the home ownership program, and how we fund that. Always the big question on everyone's mind. And then leaving time for your questions. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully you will see this. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes, Brenda, we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, here we go. So why CLTs and why now, right? That's the real question. You guys have produced an excellent needs assessment, identifying the needs of your region. But be assured, you are not alone. Across the country, housing costs have really far outstripped people's incomes. And that's a challenge we all face. Incomes go up, but housing costs have gone up faster. You see on the right how this widening gap affects people's access to housing. So around the country, people are looking for ways to create lasting affordability so that their communities can get out of this cycle of losing all the homes that used to serve a diversity of workers to an increasingly inaccessible market. And that's exactly what CLTs do. So CLTs and housing trusts, we use the terms interchangeably. They don't really have any significance. For example, our trust changed our name from Community Land Trust to Housing Trust, just so people understand what we do. These trusts have two unique characteristics. One is that commitment to permanent affordability and a way to achieve that even for home ownership, and a commitment to community-led development with broad participation from the people affected. So trusts are really an alternative to both government or market housing, and it's a locally controlled model. Here's the definition. A community land trust is an organization created to hold land for the benefit of the community and individuals in the community. So just as conservation trusts take land out of the market to protect the environment, for open space, wildlife, and all that, CLTs remove land from the market to protect our communities, especially from negative market impacts, and to preserve our community's investments in housing, and to preserve the quality of life for all of our residents. Also, this is another unique characteristic, community land trusts are democratically structured nonprofits with an open membership and a board elected by the membership. This brings the community into decision-making, and as you will see, the board itself is structured to represent all stakeholders. Well, how do you define community? What is the community in community land trust? And you define it by the region you choose to serve, right? This can be in cities as small as a neighborhood or a citywide or a region, as you are looking at and as we do at Champlain Housing Trust. So we call that the service area, and we draw our members from the service area. And memberships have real rights in the trust, some government rights that are normally reserved for nonprofit boards. And that, of course, forces the trust to keep the community engaged and informed with your decision. So this is Champlain Housing Trust. Our members can serve on and elect the board. They have to approve the following: bylaw changes, changes to the resale formula, and disposition of assets like land or a disposition of the organization. That's very big. And you see on the right are candidates for the board speaking to the membership about why they want to serve. Yeah, it's not a singing competition. So that representation on the board really balances the needs of the people who are already in the community land trust home with those of the wider community. So 1/3 of the board would be CLT residents, so people in the homes. And another third is non-resident members, so people who live in the region supporting the mission. And then seats reserved for public representatives. These could be anything from local governments to other organizations and agencies serving the kind of people that you're trying to serve, who can be allies and represent a broader community with you. So how do community land trusts make homeownership permanently affordable? This is the mechanism. This community land trust retains the land under each home, and through a ground lease, conveys the full use of the property to the household that purchases the home. The lease contains a resale formula that assures that the price will remain affordable buyer after buyer without need for further subsidy. This is the innovation that CLTs have brought to the sector, and the one that has generated so much interest, especially in hot markets. And that's the crucial balance of the model. That's really how we look at this work. It has to work for people today. We have to make homes affordable to those who need them and allow them to build wealth as homeowners, while at the same time keeping the homes affordable for future buyers. And this makes a more equitable community overall. And it helps more people across time, right, with the same investment, which is very prudent. Well, let's look a little bit back at the history. A quick survey here. But the first CLT arose from the civil rights movement as a solution to the economic and social disenfranchisement of Black Americans. People asserting their right to vote were often kicked off their leasehold farms. So in Albany, Georgia, new communities owned and farmed the land cooperatively, but they each own their own home and leased the land under it so that at sale, the home could remain, to be sold to another household with the same mission. The goal of owning homes individually, even though they farm the land together, was really important to people. The model was adapted in the 70s to the urban context as part of the emergence of community-based nonprofits dedicated to creating affordable housing and preserving neighborhoods. Cincinnati was one of the earliest, along with CLTs in DC and Atlanta. Part of the adapting was to have the organization be able to own land that wasn't contiguous, just to have the nonprofit own it, so that homes could be scattered throughout cities and neighborhoods as they are today. The other adaptation was the structure. This was no longer a close-knit community, right? Farming one piece of land, but a tool for workers to own homes and be able to live in the neighborhood in quality homes. So that key element brought forward was that there would be representation, right? Both from people in the homes and in the wider community being served. The other important thing carried forward was this ability to provide home ownership and keep it affordable. Unfortunately, these pioneers never grew to scale because they didn't have local government support. But their example inspired local governments in the next decade when the federal government declared that housing was a local problem and retreated very significantly from investments in this area. So facing drastic cutbacks, cities like Burlington, Vermont, Boston, Massachusetts, and Albuquerque, New Mexico recognized that their ability to fund affordable housing would never match the level of past federal investments. So they chose to help to create and invest in entities that would preserve affordability. The CLT model then was exciting because it enabled these cities to also offer sustainable homeownership. Remember, this was a decade of double-digit mortgage rates. Today, there are over 230 CLTs in 43 states, and the growth is exponential. With growth has also come more innovation and variety in the model. Many CLTs today do not have memberships with real governance rights, but achieve community participation and input by other means. Most have representative boards and other ways to stay in touch with their communities. Also, many now use a deed restriction or a covenant to preserve affordability instead of the land lease, making it much easier to do home ownership. Today, these instruments, lease or covenant, are widely accepted and standardized by the secondary market, enabling lenders to sell these mortgages like any others. The model has also been successfully exported to other countries in Western Europe, the UK, and Canada, as an example, all in hot markets. And they've grown exponentially there too, especially now in the UK and Western Europe. The next big expansion of the model came about with the growth of shared equity or straight deed restricted home ownership programs. These are programs created by city governments, right, and maybe other partner nonprofits, in order just to preserve the affordability of the home ownership homes that they invest in. These programs use the covenant or deed, and they tend not to have any sort of governance participation. Often it's run from a city community development office. But there's over 800 of these, and they are producing permanently affordable homes in major metropolitan areas all across the country. One of the tools that's been a great matchup is the inclusionary zoning program, where cities require developers to put affordable homes in every new development, and then they keep them as permanently affordable. And also matching up with city land banks, where they're disposing of city-owned property and putting it into permanent affordability. But what we all have in common, coming back to this, is this balance, right, between creating affordability today and affordability for the long term. Excuse me. So people ask, well, if you have to share the equity, and I will show you soon how that's done, why would people do this? You know, if you can't become a homeowner and earn everything. So the deal is fair if the buyer achieves benefits that they couldn't access without it. So let's take a look at these. The program creates immediate affordability. It reduces the price of the home initially, and people have a much smaller mortgage. So then we're providing people with the access to the security of home ownership. You know, renters today are bounced all over the place and often have to move and face big increases. So there's a stability that comes with this. It also gives, while restricted, a wealth building opportunity, because people get their own mortgage, stop paying rent, and start paying their own equity. And many, we'll see the data around the country is that people are using this as a stepping stone to the market. So they can get in, build equity, and go onto market, and you have that home for the next. And of course, as soon as you're a homeowner, you get the tax benefits. And in community land trust, we do provide support because we're vested in the success of these homeowners, and you'll see how that works. What are the benefits to the community? Preserving affordability and access to home ownership, what we're all struggling with, right? Retaining and recycling public subsidies. So it's a very prudent use of funds and also allows you to do more. You help more people, you're helping more people over time. And you're mitigating against this gentrification that we're seeing with second homeowners or, you know, urban exiles who can work from home, just snapping up properties at high cost. And as you're doing this and helping people, you're building and preserving a housing stock of quality and affordability for your community. And the last I want to say generally about the model is that, well, permanently affordable home ownership is certainly the benefit that's most commonly provided by CLTs. Most community land trusts now are community-based developers that address other needs like neighborhood revitalization, rental housing, all kinds of housing needs, as you will see with the example I'm going to use. So we'll use Champlain Housing Trust as a model to look at this in more detail. I chose this because we have similarities in our markets, high cost, rural, so we have shortage in rental, we're affected by tourism and so on. Champlain Housing Trust is a classic community land trust, and our approach to home ownership is very representative of the sector. So we'll give you an idea how people are doing this. We were among the pioneers who built this plane really while we were flying it. And we've developed many of the systems and practices that are used and shared across the sector today. This is what our mission statement says, and you see that balance. We support the people in Northwest Vermont and strengthen their communities. So always coming back to that balance. And this is how we envision our mission in action. And it's kind of an ugly graphic, but the point is we serve people from homelessness to home ownership. We have housing of all types and tenures from shelter to market home ownership. Actually, we help people do that too. And we have a range of services, mostly financial and social work, to help people succeed in this and to maybe to advance and have opportunity. This is how we are today. By the numbers a bit, we have over 300 million in assets, and we do about 200 million a year now in development. We have quite an active pipeline. We have an annual budget of 26 million because we have 130 employees. You'll see that. And we serve a 3-county region that's urban, suburban, and rural, so it's all in there. We have about 3,100 homes, and 650 are in this shared equity home ownership portfolio. That's the program you'll look at. And we, of course, are in a very hot market. So our principal activities really are simple, right? It's home ownership and multifamily housing of various kinds, but that requires the support of, of many departments of staff, from management and maintenance to real estate development, fundraising, and so on. Hence the scale of our operation. Whoops, sorry. Well, how does the home ownership program work? So you can look at this one on the ground. We require our applicants to have a pre-purchase education, which we provide. And we serve people up to 100% median income. And we have an appraisal-based formula, to share that affordability today and tomorrow. And it's commonly used across the country. It's 25% of the market appreciation that the seller keeps, but they get 100% of the value of any capital improvement. And we use both instruments, ground lease or covenant. So just a review of how buyers build equity here. It's 100% of the pay down on their mortgage and 100% of the value of any capital improvement they make, but only 25% of that market inflation we're all struggling with now. And we have to remember that the true equity building really is in that mortgage that we get to pay ourselves instead of renting. So how does it work for the buyer? Well, they take the class and they get a pre-approval from a lender. And if they can mortgage only they're mortgage ready, but for 200,000 and every home's 300,000, we encourage them to look at the shared equity option that we have. That's what we call this CLT ownership, shared equity ownership. And if they think it'll work for them, then there are various ways to buy one of our homes. We have about 30 resales a year. We do conversions from market rental, new construction, and so on. So at resale, how do we preserve that affordability? What's the mechanism? So when someone wants to sell, they have to notify us because we have a first option to buy, and we exercise that option every time. And of course, the home was appraised at the first sale, and we reappraise at each resale. And then we apply the formula, right? So people are appreciated 100,000, the seller is going to get 25,000 plus their mortgage pay down, plus any capital improvement credit. And then we charge a fee for the whole transaction. And then we recycle the rest of it to the next buyer. We market and find the next eligible buyer. This is what happens with the program over time. To understand the full impact of this, you have to see what preserving affordability does. So we have these 650 homes, but they've served over 1,200 families with resale. The average net price of our homes is $153,000. That's what the buyer has to pay. The average Chittenden County, which is our big urban county, most of our population, the average price is now $347,000. And our owners own on average 7.5 years, and that really tracks market ownership. That's very typical. And the average income that we can serve at resale is still 71% of median. And when we're trying to keep it there, and this shows that our formula is working to balance that. The lowest we've ever served is 68%. So we're really in that range. But our average subsidy, we always put 20% down, that's our goal, is now $80,000, because as these homes appreciate, that subsidy that we hold on to for buyer after buyer grows. And then 2/3 of our sellers go on to buy in the market. And many people consciously use this now as a stepping stone to build equity. People always ask us, of course, the $1,000,000 question, how did you fund this? So we're lucky in Vermont, in our region, we had, as I mentioned, the city's support. And then the state joined into this approach to affordable housing. We're a small state and don't have a lot of resources. So both our city of Burlington, the main city, and the state have trust funds, and they both raise that money from local taxes. And then our state and our city governments give us capacity grants. And then they support us in policy, in that all their public funds, whether they come from the feds or anywhere else, are only going to go to permanently affordable housing. They don't invest in short-term housing built by market developers. And then our city has an inclusionary zoning program. It's 15% of all new development permanently affordable, or 25% on our waterfront. And our state had preferential mortgages. But we use a lot of other sources as well. So there's other federal funds that the state shares. And also our state has bonded and targeted to permanently affordable housing. We do get foundation funding, and we raise money from everybody. We have ongoing member support, supporting donors from the community, charitable. We have campaigns, corporate donors. So we have to raise quite a variety of sources. We use federal and state tax credit programs, and they generate equity for us. We take land donations or bargain sales where people get a discount. If they sell it to a nonprofit discount, they get a tax benefit. We partner a lot with Habitat now, and that creates very affordable home. And then we earn fees. We earn income when we develop, manage, and steward. So just to give you a sense of what this has produced, I'm taking you to Vermont briefly here for a little tour of some of our portfolio. So we do address homelessness. We have a wide range of shelters and permanent apartments for the homeless. This is a recent purchase. In our target area in the city is a low-income neighborhood with a lot of blight. We've created, this is historic preservation and new construction community buildings. There's a big community center from a restored school. And then we've cleaned up pollution in the neighborhood and took a transit site here and created housing and mixed income, mixed use. This was a block, half a block, where we had to tear down industrial and build new construction. And then, the downtown construction with commercial in the main floor. So we have a lot of commercial tenants as well. We do housing co-ops. This is in our biggest city, a rural city up north in St. Albans, an old factory that's all apartments. A very tiny village here up in Franklin County, but they had this downtown block, and after fire, we restored it with housing upper floors and commercial below. This is our next new home ownership condos in the inner city. This is a mixed income neighborhood that we built in a very high cost suburb of Burlington. So there's Habitat Homes, the yellow building, and then rental properties. This is affordable apartments on the waterfront. And our next waterfront development, we have built the apartments here on the far left, the middle building. And this isn't built out, but there'll be 900 homes at 25% permanently affordable. So our next development there is affordable condos. This just shows the variety of homes in our homeownership because of our different markets, from rural to very urban construction. This is the next one. Oh, I misled you. This is the next new construction. And I just want to end with the Wagners here because they rented this little building for 25 years from the time it was created. And when we purchased this from the market, we took the it's a big site, and we took these duplexes and converted them to home ownership for the residents who could purchase. And today they're building equity in a mortgage at the same cost as their rent was. And of course, it was all redone when we did the condos, and it's something only a land trust can do. So I hope I have met my promise of leaving time for your questions and comments as you consider, is this a potential solution for you all?
Thank you, Brenda. That was excellent. I'm sure we have questions. I'm going to turn the questions over to Joan and Stephanie to moderate.
Thank you. I will go first because I have a question myself. The Champlain Housing Trust has grown into a large, multifaceted organization. And I'd like to know if a fledgling housing trust can start with a limited focus and grow from there. In other words, how can a CLT determine where to start?
Yes, and a group of you, we did look at this together with one of your committees, because the startup is always, of course, a big challenge. Land and housing are expensive, and so you need to have that funding to do that. And I think they own that. You have that presentation you could show the group. But essentially, of course, you have to start small, but you have to start with enough to keep going. You have to have your startup operating so you can get something done, and then raise the capital for your first projects. If you go very slow and you're very small, it will be hard to get to, to balance that sustainability. Our organization today is about 80% earned income because we manage our own property and all that. And 20% we have to raise, which is substantial. But it took us a while to get there. And in the meantime, yes, you really need either foundation or public support and an ambitious enough agenda to show somebody who gives you money that you're going to have an impact. We think sometimes, oh, if we start small, we don't need as much money, but it's harder to attract that support. That's why I think your approach of looking at the region and looking at partners and see what you come together to do is really an excellent one.
Thank you. So I think Stephanie is going to take over with the moderating from me right now.
Yes, thanks, Joan. Jane LaFleur, she's asked, has your housing trust overcome NIMBYism in the Burlington area and in Vermont? And I would ask that, how?
Yes, good. No, there are things you can do. Combating NIMBYism is one of the greatest challenges of affordable housing. And frankly, it's one of the reasons that the country is so far behind in affordable housing. Because even with zoning where it has been planned for density, we've allowed, this is across the board really, just people to stop that so that's been a challenge. So we've had different approaches to NIMBYism, but I would say it's very important to go to the community first. We always do that. Wherever we're going to develop, we don't wait for the planning commission to call them and say this is being developed. And you're not going to please everybody, but we show people what our intention, we ask them what they'd like us to, we get their criticism, and then we promise to come back. And then we come back and we're honest about what we can and cannot do. And we emphasize the positives. And so location by location, we have overcome. And then also we do a lot of community outreach and education all the time in between. A powerful thing about our membership model is our residents will come to these hearings, and it really changes what people could say in the room about those people in affordable housing. If they're there and they're like, I live here, I live in a home, you don't know, but I have a home ownership home. And then last thing I will say is you should be doing this education, or could be doing this education with partners. We started a big campaign in our region several years ago about the need to increase housing and engage private developers, the planners, everybody top to bottom agreed. And And we've really changed the thinking a little bit. The last thing I will say, which is really valuable in the rural market, is people always associated, well, we're rural, we want the character, we want to see open space. But really the education we made that if you care about open space, density is a friend of open space, and we should be maximizing our urban areas where there are facilities, amenities, resources. It's greener. It's actually much, much greener to build density and leave your open space actually open. That education has taken root in Vermont, seriously, but it took like 10 years. And again, you'll always have the outliers, but then you can overcome them with positives or at least neutralize fears.
I see a question from Bob Baldwin. Do you want to go ahead and voice your question, Bob? Unmute. You have to unmute.
There we go. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm wondering, with a situation like ours, if you could tell me who you think the most important type of entities that we should be partnering with. Who are the people, the partners that can bring the most to a group like ours?
Thank you, Bob. I think that local governments are a really important part of the story because they have resources. They get them from the state and the federal government. They have resources specifically for community development. Of course, they have an interest in it. They have, they're looking at the needs for their cities. So those partnerships can mean a lot. And you don't need every community in your region supporting you. Just need a couple, right? Who give you that foundation. The other partners that are very important are other nonprofits that I see some of you here at each of the meetings we've had together. People serving the homeless, people serving particular, maybe there's a farm worker housing program, whatever these are, you should not be coming in as a competing or totally new entity, but starting with them as part of your team and joining in partnership to see what you can. I'm a big fan, I'm a big advocate, and created a lot of this in Vermont intentionally. And at the end, it's a little harder to do it, but it's more powerful and you have more impact and you're not working at cross purposes. So we found the Habitat partnership excellent because they serve very low income people with home ownership, and we provide more stewardship and support to their owners, and we provide them with land and capital. So these are very fruitful. And then of course, you're going to want to engage people like lenders and other folks in the housing arena that you will need on the private side too, to be your allies and to help you with deals. So it's really always a public-private partnership. So those can be really, really key.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Joan, can I poll the room for questions?
I think that's a great idea. Yes.
Does anyone in the room like to pose a question? They want a little more time, Joan.
I
Okay.
have
Yeah,
one.
Stephanie has one for you.
David Watts, he says, is there a positive cash flow from the properties that might be used to encourage private fund investors, even if it is a lower return or might have some tax benefits for the investors? He's wondering if it might encourage a landowner to invest their land into the start of a project.
Okay, that's quite a complex question, actually, because things vary a lot. But let me say, usually the return from properties needs to go back into the mission of operations and subsidy. Remember, we're serving the people the market can't. So there isn't much return to pay other people. You want to, use it to keep going. Once you are at scale, you can attract social investors, and maybe as a startup, we did get some social investment, excuse me. In our community, our cities invested, our city's workers' pension fund invested money so that we could acquire properties, and we only had that money for 7 years, right? We had to pay them back, but it got us started, and that was matched by a local bank. So some sort of preferential loan like that, startup loan, bridge loan is one kind of investment. On the home ownership side, if you have to pay investors for the affordability, you will not be able to maintain the affordability. So those really need to be, you put the funds in and you lock them in for affordability over time. But other sources for social investments are big foundations now. If they're going to make a grant, many of them now have pools for social investments. So there's potential there. It varies a lot by who's in your region and then where you are in your development. The last thing I'll say about attracting investors is usually, you guys who do this, you need to have a track record and that people can look at and say, I put my money with you and it'll be there for a while. So we have used for years a state community loan fund that had built up that they took investor money and loaned it out to us. And today now, after 3 decades, we're able to attract investors.
I have another question here in the chat from Jane LaFleur. At what point in your history did you hire an executive director or permanent staff versus all volunteers?
Yep. So the way our trust was started with the leadership from the city's community development office. And it was my job as the housing director for the city to get this started. So as was our model, we just put the idea out to citizens, and the city said, if the citizens come forward and want to do this, engage, then we will give a seed grant. So that was the process. And citizens organized into committees, did a lot of volunteer work to come up with the structure, and the bylaws for the 501c3, et cetera, made all those big decisions for the organization. And when they were ready then to start looking at housing, the city gave them a seed grant to hire a staff person to do that work and to, cover some operating costs. At that time, $200,000 covered staffing for a couple of years as the activities built up. So it's always a little chicken and egg, money to get going, and then but I think pretty early on, once you've made what the volunteers need to do anyway, because that's the board, right? That's the community leadership, is make those big decisions. Who are we going to serve? What's going, what's in our, and then when you've made those decisions, you can hire someone and say, see, this is our mission, this is what we want you to carry out and get started. So that would be a path.
I have another question from Stephanie Smith. What is the biggest hurdle we might face starting up a housing trust now? Many housing trusts, including those in Maine, started years ago.
The startup has not been easy in the past either because of the shortage of funding to go into these kinds of initiatives and efforts. The Build Back Better bill has in it very significant funding for exactly this, for communities to come together and to plan and to fund the startup for housing. And unfortunately, we all know where that sits, but if it would pass or in pieces, that's the kind of federal investment we really need. What's happened since the feds retreated is we have all these great local solutions and truly much more community engagement. And that's the way this should happen, right? And create, your own of nonprofit affordable housing for your region, responsive to your needs, but it does take investment at a level that really only federal government could do. So I would say startup is always hard. You'll need a foundation or a local government or somebody to fund that startup time where, it's hard to earn fees or to attract big grants. And so that is never easy. You got to find your friends and champions.
We have a question.
Oh, yes,
I will unmute, excuse me. So Reuben Brown wants to know,
Mhm.
Homeowners make lateral moves to other trust housing, or is it up and out?
No, homeowners will also make lateral moves to other houses. For example, if the family's growing, right, or two two single parents remarry and they need a bigger home. So some folks have needed or chosen to do a bigger or different shared equity home. But a lot of people in ours are building equity to move to market. There's a lot more options too. We've also helped people who are struggling in our homes. We really provide stewardship and support. So homeowners of shared equity homes across the country in the crash, for example, were 10 times less likely to go into foreclosure. 10 times less likely than that's across the market. And that's because these programs make sure people get in with a good mortgage, we support them if they get in trouble. So part of that for us has been, we see somebody struggling, we help them get back into a rental, one of our rentals ideally, and then sell the home before they would go downhill into foreclosure. So yes, people can go laterally or any way they need to, and that happens.
Joan Fopp just put a question. How often do renters manage to save enough to become homeowners?
We haven't tracked this well, but at times when we have tracked it, it really shows up that people who are paying an affordable rent and can stabilize in that apartment, which is one of the reasons we've been so committed to rental too, can save and get in a position to go on and buy. Renters today in the market, if they're moving every few years, if they don't know what the rent's going to be, it's very, very hard for them to even access our programs, although they do. So a lot of the other path that we have seen consistently, I only have anecdotal, sorry on this, is our cooperatives. Folks who go into cooperatives because they want some ownership, but they can't get a mortgage yet. They want to learn about the responsibilities of ownership. So our co-ops always say to us, you always take our best members and leaders to go on and be homeowners. So that path, this is the reason we do the home ownership. At one point, we did a program. We started this program, Ready, Set, Rent, to help people clean up their credit to get into our apartments because we were turning away people for bad credit, even in our affordable homes. And over 2 years, we tracked them and people did succeed, but a high percentage of them then took our home buyer class because they had learned just with that credit education, the power of knowing your finances and getting a grip on them. And they were more hopeful that they could get to the point of owning with our affordable homes. So this package of paying attention to housing security and affordability first and foremost, and having the options, various options for ownership along the way is what's really going to stabilize our communities.
Anybody in the room have a question, Jonathan?
I think this group is well informed. So actually that leads us to an excellent place to stop because our meeting will have to come to a close in the next 10 minutes. Brenda, we want to thank you very much and the Champlain Housing Trust very much for this presentation and really appreciate it. And let's see some of us.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Jonathan, are you going to send her the famous pen?
I almost enticed her with a pen and I thought maybe I wouldn't do that. Yes. Present a rotary
Thank you.
in person. So I am going